So we have now successfully merged a couple of branches into a master branch for our Git GitHub Masterclass repository locally, and we have successfully pushed everything to GitHub, which in turn required us to solve another merge conflict in there. Now what I want to do is work you through yet another scenario that is going to be rather common. And in this one in particular, we're actually going to be working with more than one user. So this means that I am going to be working on this same Git GitHub Masterclass project, but now from the other repository. So you might remember how at the beginning of the course I created a fork of that repository in this new GitHub account that I created just for this course, and that I, here on Windows, created a clone of that repository. But of course, since this repository has no idea about the changes in the other repository, I don't see any of those changes. So even though I don't have a lot of the code that the other repository has, if I execute git status in here, it says that I am just up to date, both locally and from the remote. So really, this just means that the repository that I have here in this account is just entirely different to the one that I have in this other account. That means that the changes that I create in here, when merged over to the other repository, may create some issues. So that is exactly the scenario that I want to set up in here. And what I want to do is right here on the same index.html file that we have been using, I'm going to go ahead and change the content so that it now contains a form. And of course, as always, this code is going to be entirely from Bootstrap. So again, in the same way that we have searched for nav bars right here to the left of the documentation, we're going to see a forms section. And just like we did previously, just feel free to select whatever code in here you want. I am again going to select the first one that I see listed in here, which just has, just entries for the email and for the password, a bit of a text in here, a checkbox and a submit button. So nothing fancy, just a small form in here, maybe a sign-in form of some sorts, but the main thing is that I am just going to maybe replace most of the code that is inside of the body. Maybe I will just leave this h1 header inside and I will just add this form in here. Again, everything is coming from Bootstrap, and because of that, I will also need to follow the getting started guide as always. So if I copy this CSS file, the Bootstrap theme is actually used inside of my form, otherwise I would just see it without any styling. So I will just add that small CSS code. I will also add the JavaScript code all the way down below the closing body tag, make the indentation in here, and that's it. I should eventually have something very similar to the get started template that I see in the documentation. So let me just go ahead and test this out. I am going to open my file. By the way, I can right click on the name and select reveal in Explorer to just right click on the file and select open with, and I'm going to be opening this with my browser. And so I see here that it doesn't look super beautiful, but now we have this form added in there with the styling that we would expect from Bootstrap. So let's just close this, assume that this is ready. And now for the good part. Now that we have everything saved, we have to push this over to the remote. Now in this case, for the process to be a bit quicker, I didn't create another branch other than the master. Maybe I should have, but let's just execute git status. We know that index has been modified, so I will go ahead and execute add index. So it is staged. I am going to commit the changes. And once the changes have been committed, I am going to push to origin. Now, once I see that new commit over on GitHub, you can see how I have in the commit list this brand new commit at sign-in form. I can, of course, as always, just see the result in the index.html file. I see that it now contains the form in here. It has nothing else inside of the body except for the h1 header. It already contains the scripts and the CSS code over here. So it already contains everything that I edited locally. The next step is to create a pull request, which we have used before actually. But this pull request is going to be different in that over in the original repository that we have over on my original GitHub account, we have created way more commits since we first forked this repository. So I will from GitHub go ahead and create this new pull request. Make sure that in the base repository, I select the one that is over on my actual repository, the one on my other GitHub account, that the base is master and that my head repository is the local one. So it's going to be comparing the master over there on the other GitHub account to this one. You can see that we now see this message that we cannot automatically merge. This is the first time that we see this message. Previously, we were just able to create a pull request without any issues at all. However, in this case, we do see this error message, but as it turns out, we can still create the pull request. So I'm going to go ahead and click on create pull request. I will set up the title in here, maybe add a bit of a context to the person to whom I am going to be pushing this pull request or this merge request. So you of course know a little bit more about what I did in here. This is actually something that we're going to cover a little bit in more detail in the next section where we talk about collaboration on GitHub. But you really want to give the owner of the original repository as much context as you can. So that is why, by the way, most of the times in your repositories, you want some markdown files that actually let people who want to collaborate with you give you information in here. You might remember how when we created a pull request to the HTML5 boilerplate repository, it actually provided a bunch of text in here. We're going to take a look at that in the next section, but for now, let's just write a bit of context inside of this text box. So once you have added a bit of a comment in here, you can of course preview the message that is going to be sent. This is going to be compatible with Markdown, so you can use Markdown in here. Again, there is a specific section on Markdown, so you learn how to, for example, display code in here or change the font a little bit. So as you can see, form in here has a bit of a different style, so does Bootstrap, but mainly just go ahead and add something in here. Most of the times you want to allow edits from maintainers, so in case they want to make a small change before accepting the pull request, they can, and just go ahead and create the pull request. This means, of course, that first, I see that there are some conflicts that must be resolved, and I can take a look at those conflicts by clicking on Resolve Conflicts right from here. And here I can actually take a look at those merged conflicts now that I have access to the code from the other repository. So here I see the code from my repository, the form, and down below I see the rest of the code that we added previously along with the navbar and the container over here, so there is some margin to the sides, and you can just take a look at the conflict. For now, let's just head back to the pull request itself. And we see that ourselves, as the ones who created the pull request, we can figure out how to solve the conflict. But also, if I navigate to my original GitHub account and I navigate now to pull requests, I see this new pull request that was created by someone else, not me in this case. And I see the title right here, and I see the message that was added when they created the pull request. I immediately notice that there are some conflicts that must be resolved, and I myself could also take a look at those conflicts and try and go ahead and solve them. So I can just head back for now and of course take a look at all of the commits that would be merged into my repository if I want to accept this pull request, and I can take a look at the files that changed and all of the things that are different from my own repository. And hopefully by now you now feel really familiarized with how Git is going to display the different conflicting versions for specific files. And you can see that GitHub is doing the exact same thing because after all, like we've mentioned, it is just using Git. So now that we have created this new pull request and that we see that there is a new conflict in here, in the next lecture we're going to go ahead and explore a little bit what we can do inside of GitHub to solve the merge conflict. So eventually we have everything that this contributor very nicely added to our own code, so we can now have both their version and our version working in a new index.html file.